Not that it's a bad dance, but it's not that bad of a dance, not that I'm much of a dancer myself, of course, but let's lay the cards on the table, shall we accept? For a few guys who know what they're doing, and of course the posers there aren't many old men in the world are. There's Sela, I mean my love to dance of course, and we had an unspoken agreement that once she had a couple drinks with me and stepped on my feet a few times, I'd be let go, then I could resume my acquaintance with the bar and the liquid delights behind it, and she could go dancing with her buddies or other guys if she wanted to. Wait a minute, I know what you're thinking, and you couldn't be more wrong. I said dancing, and that's exactly what I meant. No jokes, no canoodling, and certainly none of that. And all the time we've been married, I've never once suspected that Sela might be doing anything like that, so no problem, right? Was there? What do you think of the present situation? Sela's been dancing with the same guy for the last half hour or more, and it's not normal. No way, 2 dances is normal, maybe 3 if it's one of my buddies or something, but half an hour went by and she still wasn't coming back. What was going on? Maybe I'm worried about nothing, but a slight twitch in my stomach said otherwise. There, the music had stopped and she'd come back to me, but damn it, she didn't come back. The fluctuation in my stomach turned into a big square lump of lead, and for the first time in our 10 years of marriage, I felt a fit of jealousy. Sela was a pretty pudgy little thing, though. Even I wouldn't say she was some kind of Miss World or something. She was pretty enough in boat races and great Bristol pants and all that, but perhaps her best feature was her pins. Beautiful, long and slender they were, and seemed to go on forever. That's why even at the age of 39, Silk could still wear such short skirts when we went out for the evening. But she still danced with him, that guy, 6 feet tall, a little skinny, with dark blonde hair, the complete opposite of my 5 feet 10 inches dark hair and thicker build. What the hell did she see in this guy? Jesus, this must be the 6th or 7th dance they've done together. Time for some action. Rising from the stool I was sitting on, I muttered something to the people we were sitting with about finding a restroom. I didn't want these people to know I was concerned about the hostess's behavior, so where were they? I was making my way through the crowd on the dance floor, trying to pick out the blue color of my wife's short dress. There they were around the corner. My steps froze as I spotted the couple my wife Sela pressed up against the blonde bastard as if they were glued together. Neither of them moved their feet. They weren't dancing, but pressed against each other in place, Sela's head resting on his chest. Oh, my insides flipped and I inhaled deeply. This was wrong, not right at all. My Sela had never done anything like this before. No, they hadn't kissed, and Blonde's hands weren't in a place where he could be pushed away, not yet. Anyway, no, it was all about the way they pressed against each other, and the fact that she was with him for so long. He said something to her, and I heard her giggle, reaching up and stroking his cheek. Too familiar. Hi, Sela, I greeted her, walking purposefully over to them. I was wondering where you'd gone. Where? Repeated my wife, puzzled, looking back in my direction with a blank expression. Where? You've been gone for almost an hour, Sela, I exaggerated, slightly trying to contain my fervor. What are you up to? I saw the light dawn on Sela's face as she came back to the real world. Oh, Ken, she gasped, uttering her voice as she released herself almost helplessly from the weirdo's clutches. It's Dave, can we? We're just dancing and chatting, that's all too long for my taste, Selah. I insisted and held out my hand to lead her away. For one terribly long moment I thought she was going to reject her, and what I would have done then I'm not at all sure. Probably would have hit somebody. Yes, Ken, of course, Selah muttered after some hesitation and gently held out her hand to me. Can I finish the last dance, please? Honey, the music has stopped, Selah. I briefly explained the obvious to her. It stopped a few minutes ago. Oh yes, of course, Ken, she muttered in confusion. I'll be right with you, dear, but I need to say good night to Dave. No good night, Selah, I insisted irritably. We're getting out of here, and I mean now. I was totally annoyed, I can tell you that. Wait a minute, buddy, your new friend. Dave started to interrupt, but one look from me, and he prudently changed his mind. Now, Selah, I repeated, now or I'll leave without you. Okay, Ken, Selah echoed, reluctantly letting go of the bugs. I'll see you sometime, Dave. Angry, how do you think you'd feel? How would you feel? What the hell do you think you're playing with, Selah? For I almost yelled at my goddamn missus as I dragged her back to the bar. Who was that damn guy? What were you doing with him? Nothing, Ken, Selah fought back. Nothing at all, but it got me thinking. That's all. Think about it. I think it was a lot more than thinking. Selah looked at me intently, and I realized she had a habit of looking me in the eye, but not this evening, and that was for sure. We need to talk, Ken, she finally said quietly. Let's go home and we can talk. Not home, Selah, I exploded, recoiling at those dreadful words which I in no way expected to hear from my mistress. If we must talk, there is no better time than now. Better at home when we're on our own, sweetheart, she insisted, but I refused, urging her to come clean while on the verge of a breakdown. Okay, she agreed, but hear me out. I agreed, horrified at what she was about to tell me, but I agreed, utterly confused and wondering if the next few moments would sound the death knell of what I envisioned as our perfect marriage. It's not a sudden decision, dear, Selah began. I've been mulling it over for a month or more, but the time has come, and I've decided to take the promise you made to me. Promise? What bloody promise? I never promised you that you could go on like this with another man. The night before our wedding, Selah reminded me you made me a promise, and the time has come. Darling, what promise? Muttered I, suddenly feeling very, very empty inside. I don't remember any promise, but I had lied. Oh God, how I had lied. I'd made her a promise just like she'd said, even though I'd put it out of my mind long ago. I think you remember, Ken, Selah said, quietly avoiding my gaze. I'm sorry, dear, and I don't want to hurt you. I'll be 40 in a few months, but as much as I love you, I think it's time. Oh, for Chris's sake, how could I make a promise like that? Let's go back a few years, shall we? The night I first met my Selah, I mean, we of course were in a small jazz club in South London, although at the time neither of us knew the other was there, and that there was a break in the music, and the people around me stood up to refill their drinks. How do I get rid of him? Man, I heard a pretty young woman standing directly in front of me address her friend. I don't mean to be rude, but I really don't like him. Well, he went to buy a drink, Selah. Her friend told her we can just leave without saying anything. I can't do that to him, the pretty blonde with long legs told her friend. It's not that he's awful or annoying or anything, I just don't like him. I looked at the girl and glanced twice at the sheer length of slender leg that stuck out from under the hem of her miniskirt. Maybe I could help a girl with a pair of stilettos like that. I have to say that at the time I had been divorced from my first lady for 2 years, and all I could say was that I was spending time with the ladies. Hello, you two, I murmured, leaning forward between them. May I offer my services? They both stared at me like I was someone from another planet. I overheard your words. I told them I can help you pretend to be your boyfriend or something. I don't have a boyfriend, the pretty blonde protested. And what does this have to do with you? Anyway, further discussion was interrupted by the appearance of the boyfriend lover, who placed a tray of drinks in front of the two girls. Generally speaking, I could see why the girls weren't thrilled with him. I quipped. I dumbfounded him, deciding to go the other way. Is it for my sister and her friend? Yeah, I guess so, he nervously replied, looking at me uncertainly. And this must be for me, I continued, picking up the beer he had so obviously bought for himself. Thanks a lot, buddy. That's damn nice of you. Your sister, the poor guy asked grudgingly, watching his pint of ale be too rapidly disappear down my throat. Yes, I replied with a smile. I've come to take her home, repeated the lover, his disappointment evident. Copied. My newly acquired sister and her friend equally surprised. Yes, home, I continued, nonchalantly smiling at the pretty blonde. You promised your mom you'd be home early tonight. Okay, I was taking a risk, and judging by the look on her face, I was about to be burned in a beautiful, glorious flame. But a cocky bastard like me has had worse failures. But then help came from another source. Could you give me a ride too? Asked in and started to gather her person things. Sure, and I replied, surprising even myself by remembering her name, and got up to walk them out, taking the blonde's hand as she rose hesitantly on long, slender legs. Thanks for the drink, mate. I addressed the hapless guy, who was still standing there with a lost look, quickly draining the pint I just snatched from under his nose. Drink up, girls, and thank this nice man, I admonished my young charges, who did so, muttering words of thanks. We must go home now, but pronounced the poor fellow. They not little girls, they must be at least 20. Yeah, but you can't be too careful these days. I teased him somewhat unfairly, so unfair that I suddenly felt very guilty. Look, see that redhead in the jeans over there? Yeah, he confirmed, looking at the redhead, one of my occasional bed companions when I wasn't being too picky. The one with the nose ring and the tattoo. That's her, I continued cheerfully, squeezing a tenner into his hand. Go buy her a vodka and tonic and tell her you're a friend of Ken. Don't let her down, sunshine. No one does vodka and tonic, he repeated, slightly puzzled by the unexpected turn of events. There you go, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. Have one for yourself too, now that you've got it. With those words, I led the two giggling girls away from the table, not wanting to look back. You cheeky bloodsucker, laughed, and as we walked out the door, you pinched the poor fellow's beer. Nonsense, young lady, I replied with a smirk. I bought him another and set him up with Lily Wright, and agreed, by the way, this is, and I'm afraid we're both closer to 30 than 20. That's okay, I replied. I'm over 30, so that's even better. At that moment, I pulled up in front of my car a 6-month-old top-of-the-line Jaguar supplied by my company, and their eyes widened Slightly damn, this is what I bought it. For after all, I was their best salesman. Well, ladies, what's up? I asked. Then were you two going to go about your business, or are we going out for another drink? A drink, Ken, definitely a drink. Scylla heard hardly the first word she uttered and stared at Jaguar, then at me. Then agreed, and we went merrily on our way. Next chapter, the rest of the evening went well, and the three of us had a lot of fun. They discovered that I couldn't dance for peanuts, but that I was good company, and I discovered that they were not only cute, but smart. What surprised me was that Scylla became religious at some stage and went abroad as a volunteer straight out of university. She didn't elaborate on why, but she became disillusioned with this life in her church and only recently returned to the UK. I was not alarmed by this. I was never particularly into religion. A few very pleasant hours passed, and we decided to call it a night. It was back to my Jag, and I was wondering where the evening would go next. They were both very attractive young girls, and I didn't give much thought as to which one I should stay with. Could you give me a ride first, please, Ken? And spoke up somewhat, preempting my suggestions. It's on the way to Scylla. Well, that seemed to be settled. We pulled up to Anne's house, and I jumped out of the car to open the door for her. Acting the mature gentleman, I walked her to the front door and went to say good night. For goodness sake, I almost shook her hand. Thanks for tonight and everything else, Ken, and smiled and kissed me. The horror, what's going on? And I asked, enjoying but puzzled by her unexpected behavior. Why the hell did you first ask me for a ride and then start kissing me like that? Glad you asked, Ken, she replied sadly, but the last time you came to the bar we flipped a coin and Scylla won. Oh, I'm not often at a loss for words. Be careful with her, Ken. She leads a bit of a withdrawn life and isn't very experienced. Oh dear, perhaps I've been won over by the wrong girl. If it doesn't work out, don't forget about me. And finished, and with one last smile she stuck out her tongue, wriggled, and disappeared through the front door. We'll see, I thought. We'll see how the rest of my evening goes. Here we go back. Toilet. I jumped back into my Jaguar, started the engine, and drove sportingly down the road, expertly shifting gears, weaving through the traffic, trying to imagine myself as Sterling Moss or Jason Button. Between you and me, it was done quite skillfully, and just what was needed to impress a girl. Ken, you've got the wrong direction, Scylla told me with a laugh. These girls know how to put you in your place, don't they? 15 minutes later, however, I was already parking in front of her building, walking up the stairs, entering her apartment, and sitting on her couch with a drink in my hand. Not bad. Sorry, I meant to say not bad. So you don't have a steady boyfriend at the moment? I asked, confident that I was on safe ground. For an awfully long time, Ken hasn't had any boyfriend, Scylla replied wistfully. I had a couple of very casual liaisons at university, and I've been in Africa ever since, and as a volunteer that was frowned upon. So what went wrong then? I asked. I don't want to talk about it, she replied, a little too sharply. But those who made the rules didn't always know how to stick to them in their personal lives, and that was about all I got out of her on the subject. I hope you don't think you'll end up in my bed tonight, Ken, my lovely companion continued with a smile. I hadn't thought of that, Scylla, I replied, figting offense and innocence. But since you brought it up, I left the comment unfinished, and she told me I had no chance at all. Half an hour Later I was lying in her bed, but had I really done the dirty deed? No, and the next night too, the third night as well. To shorten the long story a bit, Selah agreed to marry me after about 10 months, by which time we were living together. Way to go, and was to be her maid of honor, and my pal Owl was to be her best man on the grounds that he could tell jokes better than any of my other close friends. Selah's parents were thrilled that their eldest daughter had found a man, and one who had already made his mark on the world, and my parents instantly fell in love with their future daughter-in-law. It's important to note that I wasn't just attracted to entertainment, and I didn't make the same mistake I did in my first marriage. No, Selah and I already had many interests in common, and we had already tried several of them with great success. No, I didn't become a regular at church, but I did go to services a few times, and even happily agreed to a church wedding. Everyone was happy. Everything was perfect. Nothing could go wrong on this wonderful day. As I mentioned, we had been living together for some time by then, but Selah's mom wanted us to go the traditional route and not see each other the night before the wedding. So Selah packed her bag and went to Anna's house, where she would spend the night, and the next morning they would go to her mom and dad's house to get ready for the ceremony. Behave yourself, sweetie, I joked with her, knowing that she was going out for drinks with Ann and a few friends that evening, some sort of modest bachelorette party. What do you think I'll get up to? You old fool, my bride-to-be teased me. It's not like we're only going to a pub, not some male review bar. I picked you up at the pub, mind you, Selah, I laughed, handing her my jacket. There's plenty of other guys there who'd be happy to have a chat with a hottie like you. I expected her to laugh. You know, laugh or make some funny comment in response, but she didn't know. She didn't. Well, that won't happen anymore now, will it, Ken? Said Selah with a strange note in her voice. From now on, no more boys flirting with me. You mean you want other men hanging out with you, Selah? I asked cautiously. I wasn't too keen on where this conversation was leading. No, of course not, Ken, Selah immediately replied. Oh, I'm silly, Ken, just don't mind me. Do you really want to marry me? Selah demanded I, grabbing her hand and pulling her to me. You haven't changed your mind? No, of course not, honey, she replied, smiling at me and then reaching up to kiss me. I'm just emotional and stupid. With those words, Selah laughed, lightly picked up her overnight bag, and headed for the door. I'll see you at church tomorrow, Ken, she said back to me. I love you, panic gone. I pulled myself together and popped down to the pub for a last pint of beer with my mates. I'd already had a stag party a few nights before, and remembering the state I was in after my first stag party before my previous marriage, I toned it down a bit. The evening passed pleasantly enough, mostly chatting about Arsenal's recent brilliant win over Chelsea. How unlucky we were not to score a sixth goal, and the fact that the two penalties the referee, a blind goon, somehow missed could have made it eighth. By the time I got back to our house quite late, I had forgotten about that little spat with Selah and was looking forward to a cup of tea in bed. Dring. The damn phone greeted me as I walked through the door. Hello, Ken Thompson. Thank God you're finally here. And greeted me. This is the third time I've called. What's wrong? And I asked, immediately worried about what had happened. Is Selah all right? She's fine, Ken, but you'd better get here as soon as possible. Why, what's happened? Shrieked I. In alarm, has there been an accident? No. Not an accident, replied Ann, but you need to come and deal with Sela if you still want to get married in the morning. My stomach churned. Deal with Sela? What the hell happened at her bachelorette party, for heaven's sake? As you could imagine, my thoughts went to the obvious. What the hell had she done, and with whom? But Ann didn't probe any further and insisted I put on my skates and go to her place. My brain worked overtime, breaking more speed limits than it should have as I raced the 5 miles to Ann's little apartment. What happened? What happened? Where's Sela? Is she all right? She hasn't done anything stupid, has she? I peppered in with questions from the moment she opened the door for me, and only stopped when she handed me a cup of tea. Let's face it, unless you're British, it's hard to explain the multifaceted power of a cup of tea. She's fine, can I promise you, and finally admitted when I calmed down. She's in my bedroom and she's crying. Oh God, no, I muttered, assuming the worst and wondering what kind of guy she'd ended up with and what they'd been up to. Tell me honestly, and I'm begging you, how bad is it? What did Sela do? Not so much what she's done, Ken, she replied quietly, rather what she hasn't done. I could tell by my look that I had no idea what she was talking about, Ken, and began slowly, not knowing how to explain. We've had groups of guys in the pub hitting on us constantly since we arrived. 8 girls like us, dressed to the hilt, so I suppose they might well have thought we were all tipsy. So what did Sela do to Ann? Demanded I. Please just tell me. I'm sure I can forgive her. It wasn't her, Ken. Ann continued. It was all of us. Well, everyone except June and Tina. June and Tina, I repeated, puzzled. Why were they any different? They're married to Ken and don't mess around. I stared at her dumbly. It really didn't make any sense, Ken, she said rather loudly, like I was fat. We were all flirting with these guys and having a good time dancing and making out until we fell over. And Sela, no, Sela just sat there and turned down offers to dance and everything else. I still don't understand, I protested weakly. Oh, you men are so silly and went on. Don't you see, we were all having a great time flirting and talking and everything. I let one guy touch me on the dance floor right in front of everyone for a laugh, and those 2, Marcy and Judy, went off with a couple of them in the parking lot. I'm sorry, Ann, but I'm still lost. She missed all the fun, Ken, Ann said, frowning. Don't you see, you're actually the first real man she's ever dated. And it suddenly occurred to her that she could never know what playing the field was all about. Oh, my thoughts went back to how horny she was before she left the house. I put 2 and 2 together, got 5, and felt myself getting nauseous as I realized that what Ann was saying could be true. Oh, we chatted some more, Ann filling me in on exactly what had happened and what Sela had said. Eventually, I cautiously opened the bedroom door and nervously peeked inside. Are you okay, Sela? I asked timidly, looking at the untidy pile lying on the bed. What are you doing here? Can she half sobbed in response. Please go away. Not until we deal with this, honey, I insisted. There's nothing to deal with, Ken, she muttered. I can't go through with this. I'm so sorry. Maybe we should talk about it. Honey, there's nothing to talk about with Ken, she replied. I just can't go through with it. I sat down on the bed and stroked her hair for a while, and I'll admit the Thought that I should just get up and walk away from this problem did cross my mind, but not for long. It was at that moment I think that I truly realized how much Sela meant to me, how much I had fallen in love with her, and how much I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. I coaxed her for about 10 minutes or so when she suddenly sat up abruptly and hugged me, telling me how much she loved me. So what's the problem, honey? I demanded. We love each other, so let's get married. But what? I laughed, trying to lighten the atmosphere. But you're the only man I've ever been with. Ken Sela sobbed miserably. What if? Well, you know, do you mean you want to go to bed with someone else? Sela asked I, not knowing what to say, not knowing what she was thinking. Of course not, silly, Sela replied, trying to grin. We don't have anyone else and never have, so what's the problem? Sweetheart, what if one day comes? What if I need to find out what another man inside me feels like? Ken, what then? What then? What then is that your only problem, Sela? I asked softly, kissing her cheek lightly. Yes, Ken, but it's not the only problem, is it? Not at all, Sela, I replied confidently, a completely stupid idea popping into my slightly beer-addled head. Sela looked at me with a puzzled expression, almost breaking my heart with the innocent hope that shone in her eyes. As a wedding gift, I'll give you a get out of jail free card, I told her, referring to the game of Monopoly we often played. One slip up with some other guy and I'll forgive you. How about this? You don't mean? Ken, Sela shuddered. You can't, but I want to love, I continued, perhaps a little carried away by the theatricality of the whole situation. The 6 pints of beer I'd had earlier might have been involved, certainly, when I thought about it afterward. Once, just once, sweetheart, and I promise to forgive you. But Ken, I mean, well, honey, I interrupted her, pulling her close to me. I intend to love you and adore you for the rest of your life, and you'll be so happy in bed you'll never be tempted, so that's not a problem for me. Oh, Ken, oh, Sela, I don't know exactly where and slept that night, but not in that bed, and the next day Sela and I were married as planned and became Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, with her mother completely unaware that her daughter had spent half the night getting ready for her honeymoon. So many years have passed, and I can honestly say that our marriage has been as good as you could imagine. 2 children, a boy and a girl, and 2 of the best little ones you could ever wish for. And for the first few years we would occasionally bring up my promise when we were drinking or feeling a bit prudish, but it was always a lot of fun. At least I always thought it was. But for years the topic wasn't even mentioned, was all but forgotten, practically extinct. And then that dance came to mind, and my nightmare reared its ugly head. Oh, damn it, what the hell was I going to do? List, I think we better go home and talk things over, like I suggested. Ken, Sela whispered, taking my hand and really taking control, guiding me towards the exit. I'm so sorry, darling, but it's been building up inside me, and there's no way it's going away. In a daze, I let myself be led out of the club and back to our car. I didn't even know how to drive, and anyway, Sela left me no choice, sitting me behind the wheel and turning on the ignition. It won't be that bad, honey, she told me, oh so gently. We'll work it out amongst ourselves, and I promise it'll be okay. I wasn't so sure, but I was so focused on holding back my tears that I couldn't answer back. At my house, a more luxurious apartment than the one I had when we First met we walked and I was still in a daze and paid the babysitter. Well, Ken, my loving wife began. Are you ready to discuss this, dear, or shall we leave it until tomorrow? Won't you change your mind? Tomorrow, Sela asked. I know, she answered firmly. I'm sorry, but I've already made up my mind. Then we had better talk about it now, I suppose, Sela, but for heaven's sake stop asking for forgiveness all the time. All right, Ken, Sela replied calmly. I'm sorry. For God's sake, stop apologizing, I shouted at her. I can't stand it. Yes, I'm sorry, Ken, gasped Sela, looking at me anxiously. I'm sorry, but I can't help it. Screw this, I shouted, finally losing my temper. I'm going to bed. Do whatever the hell you want. Well, no solution was there. All I was doing was delaying the dreaded moment of truth. Although Sela retained the very innocence that first attracted me, I knew she also had a strength of character that didn't tolerate bickering. Yes, I wasn't going to just stand there and let her overstep her bounds, let her get her way without a fight. But I made a promise. A lot of water had flowed off the bridge since then, but a promise is a promise. My spirits plummeted when I realized that my marriage was on the precipice of a precipice we've raised our children to trust, honor, obey, and all that, and here I am at a crossroads, and the person I love most in the world is asking me to keep a promise I made to her. Oh, damn it, oh, damn it. The next morning was Sunday, and although Sela still went to church often, she chose not to on this day. I spent the night tossing and turning, and at some point my wife got up, unable to sleep from my constant movement, and went to the spare bed. I knew she needed more sleep than anyone else, but I wasn't the least bit encouraged. A full English breakfast was waiting for me when I came downstairs, and that was enough to know that her speech from the night before had been planned. I only received such favor on special occasions, and I supposed to inform me that she was going to cheat on me was considered special even in Sela's brain. Were the children? I asked Sela, noticing the unusual silence in the house. They've gone out with Ted and Andrea for the day. Sela told me they won't be back until this evening. I looked up at her, even stared at her, but she lowered her gaze, clearly very embarrassed. You planned this, Sela, didn't you? I asked. Yes, she muttered quietly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say sorry again. Oh God, I'm sorry, Ken. I threw her a lewd look, and she opened her mouth again to say something, but didn't, just shrugged, lost in speculation. Look, Sela, I know you're sorry and all, but what do we do next? I haven't changed my mind, Ken, Sela went on. I meant what I said last night. It's something I just have to do, but I love you very much, honey, and I want to make things as easy for you as possible. And how the hell are you going to make it easy for me to put up with my wife being entertained by another man? I asked her. What are you going to do? Are you going to let me watch or something? If you want, Ken, Sela surprised me. I know some men enjoy that sort of thing, darling. What, that depends on the guy, of course, and I wouldn't want it the first time, Sela, I said firmly, raising my voice considerably. I don't want you to make love to anyone else, and I assure you I certainly don't want to watch you do it. Oh, she replied uncertainly, I just thought you might want to, and I don't want to, Sela, I almost shouted back at her. Just thinking about it makes me sick. Some guys enjoy the idea, Ken. My wife gently tried to encourage me. I've read stories about it. I didn't, I reminded her. And those stories you've read, where did you get the stupid idea in the first Place no kin, honestly, it's been building up inside me for the last year or more. But I read those stories to see if I could find a way to make it easier for you. For a few moments we looked at each other, wondering what to do next. Perhaps it would be better if you just went ahead and did it without even telling me. Selah, I broke the silence. At least that I wouldn't have learned anything new or gone through that heartache. I couldn't do that to you, Ken. Selah jumped up again, holding out her hand to me. I couldn't just deceive you like that. But what if I say no, Selah? What? Then I'll just have to cheat on you, I guess, she wheezed, squeezing my hand tightly. Please, Ken, if you love me, don't force me to do this. I'm not forcing you to do anything, Selah, I remarked to her. Maybe I'm not forcing you, but you promised me, and our whole marriage was built on that promise. I had had enough of it. Any man would have had enough of it. The woman I loved was going to make me a cuckold, and knowing her, I knew it would be hard for me to talk her out of it. I could tie her up, threaten her, or do something else. But where would that get me, you ask? I was screwed. Give me a few days to think about it, please, Selah, I asked grimly. Just give me time. Okay, honey, Selah replied, a tear streaming down her cheek. But please, don't drag this out too long. For the whole of the next week I tried to play the ostrich and literally buried my head in the sand, trying to pretend that the problem might go away if I ignored it. Selah moved cautiously around me, carefully watching what she said. Several times she started to say something and was interrupted, and it didn't take much common sense to guess what was on her mind. I was talking to one, Ken muttered, my wife, one morning at breakfast, then fell silent. With who? Nervously I replied, hoping she was talking about a plumber to fix a leaky faucet or something else. Anything but the obvious. With another man, Ken, she replied, her voice shaking and her hand shaking. I called Dave. You remember the guy I danced with? Did you have his number? Selah, yeah, he gave it to me that night. I sat there looking at her, the love of my life and the woman who was breaking my heart. Not Dave, please, Selah, I insisted. Not him. Anyone but him. Why not him? She asked quietly. Why not Dave? He was pretty cute and I really liked him. Well, I didn't like him, I lied to her for lack of another reason. You don't have to like him, Ken, Selah replied a little more vigorously. You don't even have to date him. Why not just go along with it and get it over with, honey? Not him, Selah, I growled, finally starting to control myself. If I met him again, I wouldn't be able to resist punching him in the face. I'm not a violent person, and I'm usually very balanced, but the thought of that bastard entertaining my Selah kept me on my toes. So you'd prefer someone else, Ken? I'd rather it wasn't Selah, but you promised, Ken, and now things have gone too far for me to back out, she continued. There's a guy at work I really like, cute, and he's always flirting with me, so I'm sure he won't pass up the chance. And how would I keep from knocking him then, Selah? It would be just the same. Selah sat for a few moments, pondering before answering. D, what if I didn't tell you which of my coworkers was Ken? Then you wouldn't know. Yes, of course, Selah, I answered her. And imagine the next corporate party we go to, I'm going to look at each of those and guess which one entertained you, the first one who looks at me askew, and I'll probably take a swing at him. Well, what do you want, Selah? Shouted I, losing my temper. If you want to go and entertain some other fellow, do it, but don't expect me to approve of it, and don't expect anything to change. Leaving Selah sobbing at the breakfast table I got up and left unable to take it any longer. We didn't talk about anything for the next few days, but our relationship began to crumble. Although we never had a fight, we were constantly snapping at each other, and the kids didn't immediately realize that something was wrong. Something was going to happen, but I didn't think it was up to me. Can we talk, please? Ken asked Sela when I got home from work about the 5th. We can't go on like this, dear. Okay, I agreed against hope that she had finally come to her senses. The promise you made to me all those years ago, Ken. Sela began confidently enough. When you gave it to me that night, I realized what you really meant. Sela stopped and looked at me with tears in her eyes, testing what my reaction would be, but all I could do was shrug. What you promised me, Ken, that if the time came you would allow me one little fling with another man. It relieved me of all my worries, and perhaps for the first time I realized that you really loved me as much as I loved you. You had to do it to make that kind of commitment. And then came the moment when everything went downhill. Now you're saying you didn't mean, Ken? Are you saying you lied to me to convince me to marry you, and that our entire marriage is built on lies? Oh, I didn't lie, Sela. I struggled to explain, not knowing myself what I was thinking. At that moment, I could hardly admit that I was half pissed off that night after what she had just said. I meant it, but I just didn't realize there would ever come a time when you'd ask. I guess I didn't think about the consequences. Well, the time has come, Ken. Sela said slowly. I'm sorry, darling, but I just need to find out what another man is like while I'm still young and attractive enough. By this time, we both had tears streaming down our faces, but Sela wasn't backing down, and neither was I. So what was it that had Sela so suddenly attracted to you? I asked. Why, now after all these years, it's not so sudden, sweetheart, she replied, wiping a tear from her eye and trying unsuccessfully to smile. For years I've heard other girls at work talk about all the men they've been in bed with and how different they are. All the married ones have been in bed with several different men, and some of them have been in bed with several different men since they got married. And you approve of that? Asked I. Of course not, she replied. They did it behind their husband's back, and that's adultery. Besides, they didn't have a promise like I did, and their marriage wasn't based on such a promise. How about if I went with another woman, Sela? I demanded, trying to talk some sense into her. How would you have felt? Would you put up with it? No, can I? Wouldn't. Sela burst out with an angry expression on her face. That would be cheating, and I could never put up with it. If you cheated on me, Ken, I'd leave you, but you want to cheat on me, Sela? I shouted back. How in the hell do you think I want some other guy to entertain you? It's not the same thing, Ken. My wife replied equally angrily. Why can't you see that? Why are you being so difficult? We yelled at each other for a few more minutes, and after I threw the desk lamp across the room, she went off to her room crying and calling me a lying, inconsiderate bastard. 20 minutes later, I heard the front door slam as I was in the kitchen trying to save a casserole I found burnt, and I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get any help from Sela that evening. That's a thought. If she comes back and is with some guy, then we're finished. I'll demand a divorce. My mood didn't improve an hour later when the phone rang, and I ignored it for a while, convinced it was Sela messing with me by picking up some guy. But eventually, as the call continued, I picked up the phone. Hello, I answered, Sharply Kennington came the reply. She was still my wife's best friend, yes, and what can I do for you? I replied briefly. Sela isn't here, I know, Ken, she replied. She is here at my house and is in a terrible state. It's her fault, not mine. It may be, Ken's continued, Anne, but I thought I'd better let you know. She's here, not gone somewhere. Elle said. I muttered a few words of thanks and felt the tension and rage drained from my exhausted body, thinking, Christ, whom, by the way, I still don't believe in, that Sela hadn't done anything stupid. She told me what it was all about. Cannon continued after a few minutes. It must be terrible for you. It is, and I almost sobbed into the tube. Can you try to talk sense into her? Please, I can talk to her, Ken, but I can see her side too, as you realize her side. She wants to go off and cheat on me, and how can you see her side? How can anyone at all? That's not how she sees it, Ken, and told me calmly she honestly thinks your promise was sincere and doesn't understand why you think she's being unreasonable. What do you think? And was my only possible question. Do you think she is acting reason? Ably, well, yes and no, Ken, she replied, but I know that on the day of the wedding, she was so reassured by your promise. She was in such turmoil the day before that I'm not sure she would have gone through with it. Poor girl. Did she tell you? I asked, completely stunned by her statement. Did Sela tell you what I said the night before we were married? Yes, Ken, and she was so happy about it. She's talked about it often since then, and I got the impression that you both discussed it from time to time. Good heavens, no, and I replied. She teased me a few times in the early days, and I joked about it too, but the subject didn't come up for years until Sela struck a nerve with me the other day. Oh, dear, Ken sympathized, and Sela has talked to me about it quite often over the years, and especially during the last year. I got the impression that she had been preparing for it, but I didn't think you didn't know, and for that matter, I don't think Perla imagined you would react the way you did. I think she genuinely thought you would agree if she explained everything beforehand. So what am I supposed to do? And I pleaded, if she goes along with this, I don't think I can live through it. What are we going to do? You know what she's like, Ken, and reminded me with her religious background, Sela has very firm, unshakable notions, and to her a solemn promise is a promise to keep. If she fulfills it, I can understand how you would feel, but if you stop her, she may never trust you again. So my marriage is over no matter what I do. I complained unhappily, not knowing where to go from here. I may drift without a paddle. You could try seeing some counseling, and suggested you know one of those marriage helpers. And where the hell am I going to find such a counselor on short notice? And it seems to me that Sela isn't going to stick around for long. That's right, Ken. Sela's just ready to climb a lamppost for this. She still loves you, but she feels you're being unfair, like you're deceiving her about something. Oh my God, I can't win. Can I? Maybe I could help, Ken, and interjected. I've known you both for some time now. It was like grasping at straws, but I accepted her suggestion, agreeing to have Sela stay the night at Anne's house, and the next day they returned to our house for a sort of war council. I can say I wasn't looking forward to it. Hi, Ken, Anne exclaimed the next day as they entered the house. Hi, honey, Sela added much more reservedly. We hesitated, not knowing whether to enclose each other in a welcoming embrace. Eventually, I took her in my arms to kiss her, but she turned her cheek to me. Damn good start, I remarked angrily. pushing her away from me. "I'm sorry, honey." She replied, "I don't know what made me do that. Stop fighting," and told us, taking matters into her own hands. Ken is sitting here and Sela is over there and briefly outlined the situation as she saw it, and Sela sat there looking unhappy, but perhaps not as unhappy as I was then. "She let us both have our say." Sela said that she took the promise seriously, and that considering that I was practically the only man who had ever kissed her, I should realize how important it was to her. She felt that it would be unfair of me to renege on my promise just because it had taken her so long to make it. She was still very much in love with me, although my behavior over the past few days had shocked her somewhat, and she questioned whether I really still loved her. "After all, it's just entertainment," she finished, "just to see how another man feels. It won't affect my feelings for my husband in any way." "Your turn, Ken," and said, "Try to be brief." "I'll try," I replied, trying to remain calm. "I admit I made a promise, but I never believed it would happen. But that's not the point. The thought of another man making love to my wife makes me nauseous. If you want me to, I've changed my mind, and I won't stand by and accept what you want to do." I then fell silent until I said something stupid, immediately regretting not telling her I still loved her then. "I'm just obsessed," Sela objected. "You can't stand the thought of another man taking advantage of your precious bloody property. It's not fair." Sela and intervened before I had a chance to stick my paddle in again. "I think you owe Ken an apology. He doesn't want me to apologize. He told me so," she replied, and the situation spiraled out of control again, as I couldn't resist calling her a silly cow for her stupid remark. "Shut up, you two," and reassured us, "If you're going to keep this up, you'd better get a divorce." Divorce," sobbed Sela, jumping to her feet. "I don't want a divorce. I love Ken, and I don't want to leave him." "Then sit down and shut up," Sela and told her, "or that's exactly where you might end up." Having calmed down at least partially, and continued, "Is there any way you can agree with this, Ken?" She asked me, at least once. I can't imagine a single time, and I told her, "How do I know that one time will be enough for her?" "That's a good question, Ken," and replied, "Have you thought about it?" Sela, "No, not really," she muttered in reply. "But it would be just for fun and only once, just as he promised me." "And what if you developed feelings for another guy?" Sela continued, "But I wouldn't, and it would only be once, and only for fun, that no preliminary evening with a candlelit dinner." Sela continued, "And no hand-holding and kissing and all that nonsense. I don't find that very attractive." Sela put her face down on her hands and thought for a moment before answering, "Well, yeah, I guess I was expecting a bit of romance. It wouldn't have been very enjoyable without it, so it's a quick dinner, pawing in the parking lot, and then going back to his house to snuggle in bed," I threw in, sarcastically, slipping the knife in. "No, sobbed Sela, "not like that at all. I want a man to romanticize me and take the time to seduce me. You've read too many damn magazine articles, you stupid woman," I replied. "That's not fair, Ken," and interrupted. "Women don't think the same way men do. If Sela is only going to do it once, it's her only chance, and she wants it to be like a fairy tale and then go back to boring old me." "You mean," I snapped angrily, and we all sat there looking at each other, and carry on with our boring old lives like we used Two is that your main problem Ken asked. And thoughtfully what snapped I that Sela will compare you to someone else that she might accidentally find someone better than you in bed. With a sinking heart I realized that and had caught the main problem, not the only one of course, but a big one, a huge one for any guy. It occurred to me, I whispered my confession. How would you feel, Sela? She turned to my wife. If you experienced sensations you had never felt before, would you be able to forget him? Would you be able to go back and be as happy as you used to be with Ken? It blew my mind, I can tell you that. But before I could say anything, all hell broke loose. Now you're both coming at me, Sela shrieked, jumping to her feet. Neither of you realize what I've been through. None of you realize how much I need to know what another man is like. I thought you would understand me, and I thought you were my friend. I am, Sela protested, and I'm just trying to. Before she could finish her sentence, Sela shouted at her, shut up, both of you. I yelled at both of them, jumping to my feet. Enough of this nonsense. Both women fell silent and stared at me with their mouths open. Neither of them had ever seen me react so angrily in all the time we'd known each other. I've made my decision, I told them, and my voice dropped to a reasonable level again. I'm not putting Ken off. Sela snorted. You promised? Yes, I promised, I confirmed, looking her straight in the eye. And we've always raised our children to keep their promises, so if it's that important to you, Sela, I'll keep mine. There was a stunned silence. They both stared at me in amazement, hardly believing what they had just heard. Oh, muttered and faintly, are you serious, dear? Asked Sela cautiously. You really mean it? Yes, Sela, I do mean it, I replied with far more confidence than I felt. You want to have fun with another guy, Sela? Then go ahead and do it. Enjoy yourself. Have a hell of a lot of fun with it. And you don't mind? Asked Sela, perplexed. Of course he bloody mind, Sela, and cut in before I could answer. He hates the very idea. Stop torturing him, but you'll let me do it, sought reassurance for my wife. Yes, I said I would allow it. And will you forgive me after that, my dear? That's what I promised you, isn't it? But why can't she? Asked. Why did you change your mind so suddenly? Because I suddenly remembered how much I love you, Sela. That made her perk up a little. Do you really love me enough to let me have fun with another man and forgive me, sweetheart? Sela shuddered, a new tear streaming down her cheek. And you'll still love me after that? I promise to forgive you, Sela, I replied, choosing my words carefully. Whether I'll still love you after that remains to be seen. I don't understand. Can I promise to forgive you all these years, Sela? I reminded her, but I didn't and couldn't promise that I would continue to love you. It's just impossible to promise something like that. How the hell do I know how I'll feel when you come back to me having slept with some other guy? That's it. I played my trump card and could see how this would turn out. But Sela didn't realize it yet. I'll make this quick, Ken, I promise you, darling, she said softly. Just this once, I promise. You take your time, Sela, I replied calmly. Take your time. Maybe you'll find that guy Dave that you like. If you want to have a real romance, spend as much time as you want and get it all out of your head. And you're okay with that? Asked Sela, her face creased. She was beginning to worry, but not that worried yet. I didn't say I didn't mind. I just said, I'll forgive you, but don't you dare tell me about this, about who it is, where you're meeting him, how good the entertainment is. I don't want to know anything about it ever. Just tell me when It's over however long it takes, and we'll see how we feel about each other. And if we have a future together after. I've officially forgiven you of course, but I'll still love you, honey. Selah exclaimed, you're the only man I'll ever love. You don't know that, Selah. I told her sadly, neither of us knows how we'll feel with these words. I got up, took my coat, and went to the door. Where are you going, dear? Exclaimed Selah. To fetch the children, Selah. I replied, I'm going to leave them until late this afternoon. You'll have a chance to call in private if you want to. Selah just leaned back in her chair with an absent look, but then jumped up and grabbed me as I left the house. You're either an insensitive idiot or a goddamn genius, Ken. She rushed toward me. Probably both, I smirked weakly. I hope it works out for you, and wrinkled her nose. I understand what you're up to, trying to scare her with the consequences, but I don't know if it'll work well. I just hoping that it works, I replied grimly. I just have to hope. So Selah and I went on with our lives, trying to pretend that nothing had changed, but it had, and sometimes the atmosphere was stifling. I didn't treat her differently and never checked up on her, figuring it was her decision to start something, though I might as well finish it. At least we didn't snap at each other. But the lack of conversation between us was almost as bad. I relaxed a little, confident that I knew my wife well enough to realize that she hadn't started anything, but my hopes were dashed when my so-called knowledge turned out to be correct. Coming home from work one evening, I couldn't figure out what was wrong, but I just knew something had changed. She wasn't more confident, happier, sadder, but she was different. Almost more distant. I guessed she had a date with someone, but of course I couldn't ask her about it, though. As Friday night approached, it was becoming all too obvious. I've decided to go out tomorrow night, she informed me on Thursday, pretending to cut vegetables so she wouldn't look at me. Great, I replied, not looking up either. Enjoy. Aren't you curious where I'm going, Ken? She demanded. Not really, I replied this time, raising my eyes to her, unless it's something I need to know about. Selah put the knife down, stood silent for a few moments, then turned and silently walked out of the room. Damn. Things didn't seem to be going according to plan. Friday went by like a blur, and I argued over nothing with a few coworkers at work. It wasn't their fault, of course, but the situation wasn't my fault either, except in part, of course, or maybe it was all my damn fault. When I arrived that evening, Selah was already home, and my dinner was ready to be put in the microwave later. There was even a bottle of decent red wine on the table, already open and breathing. The expression a man condemned to death eats a hearty breakfast came to mind, and while I doubted I'd be able to eat most of the meal she'd prepared, I had no doubt the wine wouldn't take long to arrive. Hello, dear, Selah greeted me as she descended the stairs. Have you seen the wine I left for you? Is it the right one? It'll do, I replied grumpily. By God, she looked beautiful. Selah just looked beautiful, and I had to turn my head away because I felt like I was choking. Then I'll go, Ken, Selah announced quietly. I'll be back before midnight. Then are you sure you want to go through with this, Selah? I asked, though it sounded like nothing more than a quack. One last attempt to talk her out of it. I have to, sweetheart, she whispered back to me, but don't worry, honey, I don't plan on going all the way tonight. I'm just going to see how I'd be dating another man first, and that's supposed to make me feel better. My anger started to build Again, I guess not, sweetheart. Selah muttered back, leaning over to kiss me. Goodbye, I have to go now, save the kisses for your lover, I growled, turning to face her to avoid her embrace. Selah raised her head in surprise, stared at me in silence for a few moments, then turned and headed for the door. Enjoy yourself, I saw sarcastically shouted after her. Next chapter. One sat there wondering where I had gone wrong. What else could I have done? It was the 21st century, and the days of a man dragging his woman by the hair and physically submitting her to his will were long gone. It was her decision, but what I did afterward would remain mine. I would forgive her, at least formally, though I knew in my heart that I couldn't really. What was going to happen? A quick divorce or a slow plunge into some sort of marital hell? I didn't know, but I was sure I'd track down that bastard Dave, and if he really did accept her advances one way or another, the bastard would pay. What would I do to her? God knows, probably nothing. She'd be shocked to find that one day I wasn't around anymore, even though deep down I knew I still loved her so much that it would hurt me as much as it would and, of course, for the children. Damnation, damnation, and explosion. How could life be so cruel? And the sound of the front door closing brought me out of my reverie, and I wondered why it was taking her so long to leave the house. But the sound of the door closing meant that she had indeed left, gone to meet another man. I felt the black cloak of misery descend on me again. Then I heard the living room door open and turned around to see Selah standing there with tears in her eyes. You promised to forgive me, didn't you? Ken, she half sobbed. I promised, I answered cautiously, wondering why she still hadn't left. Then forgive me for being such a stupid, inconsiderate wife, please. Ken, I stumbled over my words. I guess I couldn't do that, Ken, I blurted out. I opened the front door and physically couldn't cross the threshold. It suddenly came to me what I'm going to do to our marriage and what I'm going to do to you, honey. I don't want to date another man, Ken, and I can't believe how stupid I've been. All I want is for you to love me. You still love me, don't you? Ken, more than ever, I gasped, jumping to my feet and wrapping her in a hug. More than ever, darling, and you forgive me. Darling, completely, darling. I told you that night before we were married that would love and adore you forever, and I meant it. Or do you remember what else you promised me that night, sweetheart? Selah whispered Helly in my ear that you would please me so much in bed that I would never be tempted. I remember. Selah, then why don't you take me upstairs right now and keep that promise, she continued, and I'll promise you to never ever mention that other promise again. I grinned, took her hand, and led her toward the stairs. Selah and I were about to start the first day of the rest of our lives, and all was well again at the Thompson house. Thank you, Lord. Oh, I forgot I wasn't supposed to believe in him. Was I the end? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.